Everyone has strengths and weaknesses, right? Of course. But some people have strengths that propel them further than others, while others have weaknesses that keep them further behind everyone else. And what we want to know right now is, what were the strengths and weaknesses of the Negro? The time period we're discussing is in the late 1800s, just a few decades after the end of slavery. And Mr. Booker T. Washington is going to fill us in with his perspective on the matter. And so we will be studying from his 1899 writings, The Future of the American Negro, which is contained right here in the Booker T. Washington collection. So let's open it up and see what he saith to us today. Service. It has been urged that the Negro has inherent in him certain traits of character that will prevent his ever reaching the standard of civilization set by the whites and taking his place among them as an equal. What he's talking about is the belief that those labeled as Negroes were created to be mentally inferior to those called whites. Inherently inferior in the mind means they believed the Negroes' brain hardware would not allow them to reach certain mental heights. It's saying that nature or God or whatever you want to refer to it as put a lower limit on the Negro's thinking capacity than that of the whites. And the implication being that there was no way to change this since it was designed that way from the beginning. This right here was one of the many doctrines created during the time of slavery to justify the practice. And of course, if you've been listening to these commentaries for some time, you will know that we have previously covered this topic. But now you can see that Mr. Washington was well aware of this belief as well. It may be some time before the Negro race as a whole can stand comparison with the white in all respects. It would be most remarkable considering the past if it were not so, meaning it would have been extremely impressive if Negroes came out of American slavery and within a relatively short time showed themselves to be at least equal in all abilities to the whites. But due to their history of being mentally and culturally destroyed in slavery, it was expected for Negroes to take a little while to get their mind right and demonstrate their potential. But the idea that his objectionable traits and weaknesses are fundamental, I think, is a mistake. He didn't believe that Negroes lacking in the intellectual department and other weaknesses at the time were fundamental or hardwired that way. He believed that Negroes had the ability to make drastic improvements in those areas if they had the right type of guidance. For, although there are elements of weakness about the Negro race, there are also many evidences of strength, and we will deal with both of them in this commentary. It is an encouraging sign, however, when an individual grows to the point where he can hold himself up for personal analysis and study. This is a very important point here. A person has reached a high level of maturity and growth when they can step back and make an honest examination of themselves. Because it's easy to examine other people, but to focus one's own attention on thyself is one of the marks of an advanced person. It is equally encouraging for a race to be able to study itself, to measure its weakness and strength. When he says race, we can just interpret this as group. So for a group to be able to put its own culture and habit up for scrutiny and be able to identify the strong and weak areas, that's the mark of an advanced group. Now, the super advanced group is not only able to identify the weak and strong points, but they're also willing and able to do what's necessary to improve the weak areas. That's part of pivoting, and also being able to detach from the counterproductive ways in order to take on more productive ways, right? This is the mark of the super advanced group, and not many make it to this point. It is not helpful to a race to be continually praised and have its weakness overlooked. Neither is it the most helpful thing to have its faults alone continually dwelt upon. You got to have balance. If you focus just on the negative aspects, then that's all you'll ever see. If you focus only on the positive, then you'll ignore the real problems and you won't be able to grow. You got to strike the right balance between the two. What is needed is downright straightforward honesty in both directions, and this is not always to be obtained. And that applies to most people, not just the Negroes. Most people struggle being honest in both directions. There is little question that one of the Negroes' weak points is physical. Especially is this true regarding those who live in the large cities, north and south. This is referring to physical health, not muscular strength. Negroes died at high rates in the city due to poor living conditions and poor habits. But in almost every case, this physical weakness can be traced to ignorant violation of the laws of health or to vicious habits. You see, Dr. Du Bois dealt with this in the Philadelphia Negro, how Negroes were dying at high rates from tuberculosis or consumption, as they called it back then. And that's because they were crammed up together in poor quality housing and because the hygiene habits of the Negroes. So both of those together aided in physical weakness. The Negro, who during slavery lived on the large plantations in the South, surrounded by restraints, at the close of the war came to the cities and in many cases found the freedom and temptations of the city too much for him. The transition was too sudden. The slave life out in the country was greatly different than the city life, and many Negroes didn't properly adjust to this new environment, which caused them to go downhill, right? They rushed into the city too fast, and the city basically ate them alive. Another element of weakness which shows itself in the present stage of the civilization of the Negro is his lack of ability to form a purpose and stick to it through a series of years, if need be, years that involve discouragement as well as encouragement, till the end shall be reached. A few pages ago in the book, he talked about how Negroes kept using one job to step to another, and then another, and then another, and never sticking to one thing long enough to master it. This was one of the weaknesses of the Negro from Mr. Washington's view. Of course, there are brilliant exceptions to this rule, but there is no question that here is an element of weakness, and the same, I think, would be true of any race with the Negro's history. Here we go. Individually, the Negro is strong. Collectively, he is weak. A Negro could do a lot of things by him or herself, but when it came to doing things as a group or as a team, the Negro fell short of the glory of God. This is not to be wondered at. The ability to succeed in organized bodies is one of the highest points in civilization. He's saying that people who can organize show themselves to be highly civilized people. And this is obviously one of the ways in which civilization was first able to begin. There needed to be people who worked together toward a common goal. And on another note, one of the theories behind the Neanderthal going extinct was due to their lack of organization. The modern humans were more group-oriented, and as a result, they were able to kill off the Neanderthals. And apparently, the Neanderthals were much more physically stronger than the modern humans, but they lacked the skills to connect with other Neanderthal groups and therefore didn't survive. So this gives a fundamental understanding of just how important it is to be able to function as a collective. And I always add that it has to be with the right people, or you could have millions of people in a group, but the group still won't go anywhere, right? So the quality of the group is just as important as the numbers are. There are scores of colored men who can succeed in any line of business as individuals, or will discuss any subject in a most intelligent manner, yet who, when they attempt to act in an organized body, are utter failures. And that's not going to cut it. And that's what you have a lot of happening today. A few successful individuals, but not too much noteworthy success as a group. And it's going to continue to be that way. That's why I said the black thing is over with. It's already reached its peak, and it did what it was created to do. And what you see now is about just as much as you can expect out of it anytime soon. So to reach new levels, you got to get out of that vehicle and jump into a new one that is completely different as far as the mentality goes, the culture goes, and the reputation. You see? Who can understand? Let's continue. But the weakness of the Negro, which is most frequently held up to the public gaze, is that of his moral character. This was the Negro's weakness that was put most into the public spotlight. The weakness of moral character. No one who wants to be honest and at the same time benefit the race will deny that here is where the strengthening is to be done. If anyone wanted to really help Negroes, they would have to be honest about the fact that Negroes needed to improve in their morals. It wasn't being mean or trying to tear them down. It was just telling the hard truth. It has become universally accepted that the family is the foundation, the bulwark, of any race. It should be remembered, sorrowfully withal, that it was the constant tendency of slavery to destroy the family life. All through 250 years of slavery, one of the chief objects was to increase the number of slaves, and to this end almost all thought of morality was lost sight of, so that the Negro has had only about 30 years in which to develop a family life. The whites forced Negroes to develop a counterproductive culture around the family by not allowing them for centuries to have experience raising kids for the civilized world. And during the time Mr. Washington published this in 1899, it was just over 30 years of experience that Negroes had with raising children on their own. And for obvious reasons, most of them weren't that good at it. While the Anglo-Saxon race, with which he is constantly being compared, has had thousands of years of training in home life because they didn't get their culture destroyed. When the English came into this land, they still had family traditions intact. The only thing they did was convert into white people and develop a more dominating attitude towards the people of the brown skin that they wanted to keep at the bottom. But now that I think about it, there were also many of the Southern whites who were not good at raising their children either, right? Just like the Negroes. Their ancestors came from the lower realms of Europe, where they didn't have great child-rearing skills either, right? That's in a book called The Cracker Culture by Dr. Grady McWhiney. So the whites had a mixture of various child-rearing skills depending on where their ancestors originated. The Negro felt all through the years of bondage that he was being forcibly and unjustly deprived of the fruits of his labor. Hence he felt that anything he could get from the white man in return for this labor justly belonged to him. Since this was true, we must be patient in trying to teach him a different code of morals. This is dealing with thievery. Negroes had different ideas of what constituted stealing than what the general society had. And it was beneficial to them to have those ideas while in slavery, but not in the free society. From the nature of things, all through slavery, it was life in the future world that was emphasized in religious teaching rather than life in this world. The future world is a world that's made up in people's imagination. That's why there's so many versions of it. And anyone could make one up at any time. The real test is getting people to believe in it, which the whites did in regards to the Negro. They sold the Negro on their biblical interpretation of the afterlife, and they had the Negro looking forward to the day of the Lord, since they had no hope for anything in this world. Meanwhile, many of the whites were doing the opposite and looking forward to what they could establish for themselves in this world. And the heaven ideas came secondary. In his religious meetings in antebellum days, the Negro was prevented from discussing many points of practical religion which related to this world, and the white minister, who was his spiritual guide, found it more convenient to talk about heaven than earth. When he says the white minister was his spiritual guide, that deals with the whites introducing Jesus and the Bible to Negroes, and also giving them their interpretation of the scriptures, because the vast majority of Negroes could not read when they first learned the Bible. That's why the white minister was the spiritual guide for them. And this spiritual guide guided them where? To an interpretation of the Bible that made them good slaves, like Mr. Frederick Douglass talked about in his autobiography. And also to an imaginary place called heaven, which is where good Negroes went when they died. And this was to keep the Negro's mind occupied with something other than succeeding in this world, because they didn't have a chance to do that when they were locked down in the dungeon, chained up in slavery. So very naturally that today in his religious meeting, it is the Negro's feelings which are worked upon mostly, and it is description of the glories of heaven that occupy most of the time of his sermon. Come on with it. Having touched upon some of the weak points of the Negro, what are his strong characteristics? Let's talk about them. The Negro in America is different from most people for whom missionary effort is made, in that he works. He is not ashamed or afraid of work. So the Negro could get down and dirty when it came to labor. Negroes could work in the field and anything else that dealt with the hands. When hard, constant work is required, ask any Southern white man and he will tell you that in this the Negro has no superior. So that means they could outwork the whites, the natives, the Irish, and any other people on the land. And apparently that was part of their reputation, according to Mr. Washington. He is not given to strikes or to lockouts. They won't stop working to demand better pay or better treatment. So he's basically implying that they were very loyal and reliable when it comes to working for someone. He not only works himself, but he is unwilling to prevent other people from working. Of the 40 buildings of various kinds and sizes on the grounds of the Tuskegee Normal and Industrial Institute in Alabama, as I have stated before, almost all of them are the results of the labor performed by the students while securing their academic education, which is impressive. Now, this was written in 1899, but 4 years later in his 1903 autobiography, Up from Slavery, he stated that the Institute had 60 buildings in total, and only 4 were not built mostly by the students. And to me, this is a huge deal, especially being in the time period and the setting that he was in. So a lot of respect has to be given to Mr. Washington, just on this accomplishment alone, and also to the black students who took the time to construct those buildings, right? Very impressive. One day the student is in his history class. The next day the same student, equally happy, with his trowel and in overalls, is working on a brick wall. This is the head knowledge coupled with the hand labor that he's previously talked about. While at present the Negro may lack that tenacious mental grasp which enables one to pursue a scientific or mathematical investigation through a series of years, he has that delicate mental feeling which enables him to succeed in oratory, music, etc. And these Negroes could do just about better than anyone else on the planet. The music talent is certainly undeniable. James Brown, Michael Jackson, Prince, George Clinton in Parliament Funk. Come on with it, man. That funk music from the 60s and the 70s was something magical. The Mothership Connection, Cosmic Slop, Flashlight, come on with it. And some of that gospel music is fire too, right? We got to be honest here. And also there was a lot of good music that was made in the 80s as well. While I have spoken of the Negro's moral weakness, I hope it will be kept in mind that in his original state his is an honest race. It was slavery that corrupted him in this respect. But in morals he also has his strong points. Like what? Few have ever found the Negro guilty of betraying a trust. There are almost no instances in which the Negro betrayed either a Federal or a Confederate soldier who confided in him. There are few instances where the Negro has been entrusted with valuables when he has not been faithful. This country has never had a more loyal citizen. He has never proven himself a rebel. Should the Southern states, which so long held him in slavery, be invaded by a foreign foe, the Negro would be among the first to come to the rescue. So loyalty to the country is what he attributed as a moral strength of the Negro, showing how faithful Negroes were and how they could be trusted in the time of need, even by those who did them wrong. Perhaps the most encouraging thing in connection with the lifting up of the Negro in this country is the fact that he knows that he is down and wants to get up. He knows that he is ignorant and wants to get light. He fills every schoolhouse and every church which is open for him. he is willing to follow leaders when he is once convinced that the leaders have his best interest at heart, which is a wise thing to do. Test the heart and the sincerity of the leader before following. Under the constant influence of the Christian education which began 35 years ago, his religion is every year becoming less emotional and more rational and practical, though I, for one, hope that he will always retain in a large degree the emotional element in religion. So there we have it, some of the strengths and some of the weaknesses of the Negro from Mr. Washington's perspective. So I hope you found something valuable from this commentary. Continue following along on the path, and from here we will pick up in the next commentary. And so I thank you for your time and attention. My name is Brooklyn St. Michael, and I'll see you in the free world.